introduce a very amazing panel on AI. So normally when we speak about AI, we speak a little bit about fear, what's going to happen to AI and how this is going to change the world. But very few speak about how this can impact, the global market, the global growth markets. And that's very interesting to start talking about. So let me introduce this amazing panelist. We have first start with our moderator, His Excellency, Ambassador Philippe Tigo. His Excellency has been the advisor to the Kenyan president on technology. He's connecting government policies with grassroots initiatives and entrepreneurs. Mr. Philip, thank you. Yeah. Do the dance, please. Then our panelists, we have Mr. Christian Thériault. Am I saying it right? Yes. He's the partner at Material Impact. Christian is a scientist, investor, and a serial deep tech entrepreneur. Third, we have Danilo Lemuero. Danilo is a PhD holder from MIT. He's also a master's holder from Oxford. And he also is running a great company on introducing AI in the legal space. We have with us Chico Gitao. Chico is the founder and CEO of Kala. Where are you, Chico? Come in. Enough for lunch. She's a tech enabler. She's building a tech enabler and a problem solver that helps organizations across Africa in their digital transformation. We have with us Mr. Osama Al-Qadi, who's the CEO and co-founder of Encorta. This is a Silicon Valley company that is redefining data access for businesses. Thank you. And last but not least, we have with us Noor Al-Hassan, who is the co-founder and CEO of Tarjama and Arabic.ai, and is building a fantastic company that makes content available to hundreds of millions across the Arab world. Guys, let's have a big applause for this amazing panel. I'm saying bye to them. Ambassador.
I have two microphones. No problem. Thank you so much, Ahmad, for the introductions. Just to check if you're in the right session, harnessing artificial insemination for achieving. Just checking. It says AI, right? We have to say what AI is. So it's artificial intelligence, not artificial insemination. So please, if you're in the right panel, know this is the right room. This afternoon, I think we have a couple of minutes to talk to an amazingly distinguished panel on how we can harness AI for achieving prosperity in the global growth markets. I think we know very well that AI is shaping how we live, learn, work, communicate. We know in the last 2-3 years with acceleration from 2022 that AI is concentrated amongst a few countries and a few companies. And so I think this distinguished panel is trying to break this mold to say, listen, as much as we say the world is moving around AI, there's a lot of work that is happening in the global growth markets that we do not know about. And so I think this may be the best panel. We will put that into test from the previous health panel. And so I think I'm going to keep it very short. And because we have a distinguished panel, they're really doing a lot of deep work around AI. It's a very challenging environment. And so I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and maybe we'll start with Danilo, right? And this will be to everybody. I think across your work, the single most misunderstood, overlooked opportunity around artificial intelligence is in the growth markets. As I said, I've been in this space for a while, and there's always examples from the global north, right? So it's all the east. Europe was also struggling a bit, so maybe they need to join in the growth markets when you talk about AI. So whether, I think for me, in legal services or material innovation or localization of solutions or enterprise data, why do you think, or what is this single most overlooked or misunderstood opportunity in this part of the world? And I know, for example, that you're developing against deeply sensitive legal challenges in Latin America. So what convinced you that AI, rather than traditional approaches, can drive systemic change at scale in those markets.
Hello.
For now.
There you go. Thank you for the question, Mr. Ambassador. So when we started the company, we had a big issue in Brazil, a big problem. And I'm going to tell you some data that you probably won't believe, but Brazil is the most litigious country in the world. We have 7 times more lawsuits per capita than the US. The equivalent to 75% of the country GDP is under dispute in tax courts alone. So it's really insane. There are many reasons for that. I won't get into the details, but when we looked at that, we thought, okay, so we have these millions of case law databases scattered across the country. But what if we unify all these databases, and then it's going to be a huge data set. And one thing that AI is very good at is finding patterns in big data sets. So the core idea of the company was, what if we turn law, the legal system, into mathematics? And this way, we would be able to find patterns in litigation and in the outcome of lawsuits in the country. I started building that in 2018. Foundation models, large language models wasn't a thing back there, so we had to build our own models. We started doing so, we built then this huge data set, and we found out that what consumers wanted was not so much the prediction, but access to the data set. And that was a huge opportunity, because then we can leverage the foundation models right now to look for patterns on this data set. And what we're doing right now is we built this data set with the prediction models and all the statistics, so a lawyer can get into our product and make a much better and faster search for case law, and also understand the legal trends. So something that was thought to be so unpredictable and would imply many transaction costs in the country, now it's much more intelligible. And with AI, we are capable of leveraging big data sets to make this product that make the legal system in Brazil much more predictable and accessible to people there.
Interesting. So I think, and Chico, maybe this will come to you later around, I'm sure it's in Portuguese, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sure that there'll be an issue where you link with Chico around linguistic diversity, but then building dependable AI models means trade-offs, right? And I know, for example, in our instance in Kenya, because we have a similar work we're doing, that the models tend to hallucinate a bit, or quote case law or precedences that don't exist. So how do you basically then ensure that you strike the balance, right, between human oversight and corrections, and what corrections do you weave in terms of your platform as you develop this technology?
That's actually a big opportunity for us, because when OpenAI and Google and et cetera are building these models, they're not thinking of a specific case of use cases. In our case, we have a lot of contextual knowledge and contextual data, so we know what are the kind of use cases that we're building on, and what is the user experience, and so on and so forth that we build on. And we can also teach the AI not to hallucinate, because in legal services, it's trust is everything. So we need to make sure that whatever the large language model generates must be true, and you got to reference that to a source. So that's one of the advantages that we have. We get all the large language models, but we have proprietary data and contextual knowledge that we apply the large language model to our data and teach the model to serve that specific use case in which specifically trust is core. So that's not so much a hindrance, but an opportunity for us.
Excellent, and I think I'll come back to you later, because this goes to, I think, a natural segue, because maybe start thinking about issues around access, issues around indigent access to sort of the judicial process, because we know, right? So I'm sure a lot of the majority of the litigations happens to people who are more poor, who cannot access the legal system. So maybe at some point you probably will try and help us understand how AI is enabling many who are already excluded from the physical form of justice can actually access justice in a more inclusive way when it comes to technology. So I think Kala, Chico from Kala, this is very much your alley now, right? So I think, and your success really rests on deeper local insights, which is what is mentioned that out of the big tech companies, whether it's OpenAI or Google or the rest, miss. So how do you ensure that your AI basically faithfully reflects whether it's African linguistic diversity or cultural diversity? And what can you share that has been a standard example from Kenya or any other African market?
I think that we're going to do musical chairs. Okay, musical mics. Okay, it works perfectly. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Ambassador Thigo, and thank you for the Carl Shepherd Center for having me this afternoon. So as he was speaking, so funny thing is we literally just launched this week a similar product in Kenya, and we are calling it Legal LM. But our premise for launching it is very different from what you have done. So you're saying it's 7x, and I mean, this US is the ambulance chaser type of legal and judiciary environment. In Kenya, it's the exact opposite. More than 80% of people in our judiciary system are in that system because they don't have any legal representation. 80%. Let that sink in. And they're in that judiciary system. And in Kenya, it's very diverse. It's from like high-stake jail to like what we call, I've forgotten the name, like purgatory before you go to jail. And in that space, people stay for years because they just don't have any form of representation. So what we did is we worked with lawyers, our Chief Justice's office, not just in Kenya, we are in 6 countries. It was launched in 6 countries in Africa, to just be able to understand what is the decision-making tree and workflow for justice system. If I knock somebody on the street with my car, or by accident, or I grab somebody's phone, or somebody puts something on in my purse and it's stolen, what is the decision-making process? It's taken us, I think, 18 months to be able to do all this in different streams, and now we have a model that works. And what I was trying to think when he was saying what I love about AI, it is solving for many work streams. For us, it's solving for these 80% of African people who are in the judiciary system because they just can't pay a lawyer. And there are not enough lawyers to be able to provide the kind of justice that they need. And that's what, now jumping into the question he's asked, Africa has more than 2,000 languages. If I was just to take a pulse, how many of them do you think are represented in the current AI space? Google, which is like our best version of representation when it comes to languages, has only 60 languages. And why? We'll not blame Google, because many of our languages are in oral form. They are not digitized, which means there is no Unicode for what I say. It does not exist in any digital format. So even as we're speaking about AI, we are 15 steps away from that language being included in this space, which reduces the amount of inclusion of African data into the AI pool to less than 2%, which means a huge chunk of the African continent remains behind. So when you think about inclusion and making sure this happens, you have to be very cognizant of, we have to start with where people are. We can't say because Google has done for us 60 languages, we are okay with that. We have to know that there is somebody somewhere in a village in Africa speaking a language that Google does not know that needs to be included. And not just included in terms of their language, but also in terms of their context. My son has gotten to that age when he's asked me to stop using him, but I'm going to use him. He's not watching this, hopefully. So my son's name is Kiama. Kiama in my language means miracle. But also, it means 5 other things in my language and 15 other things in other African languages. So my child's favorite tool these days is what? ChatGPT, voice. So he goes on ChatGPT and says, what does Kiama mean? What did ChatGPT give to him? Everything apart from miracle. So my son came back to me and said, Mommy, you lied to me about my name. And that's our reality in many, many places, because our context has been erased in the rush to include. So because Google search will give me miracle in 3 different translations, that is what ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude will pick, but will not pick the context of use of that particular word or language. So when you're talking about this, Africa needs to be able to be included, our language, our context, and our culture. And culture means that there are things that are acceptable on the African continent that Americans will never make sense of. And there are things on this continent, if I spoke about it in my village, they'll kick me out of it. But they're not necessarily bad. So when you talk about AI, there are all these layers that needs to be unfolded, which boils down to we need to be able to have local talent, being able to bring all this together. It can be a young, and I'm sorry if this offends you, I apologize. It can be a young, blue-eyed, blonde male sitting in Silicon Valley doing this. It has to be somebody on the African continent doing this because they are solving for us. And Emeka is here. Emeka is the chair of the advisory board in Nigeria. And they have a fantastic program called the 3MTT program, the 3 Million Tech Talent program, where they're using young people in villages across Nigeria to collect what I've just said, their language, their context, and their culture to be able to inform AI. And this needs to be replicated across the continent. So talent is very big. And we are a young continent. In the morning, somebody clearly said we are on average 17-year-old continent. So these young people need to be created for employment. Number 2, we need to be investing in compute. And I loved the conversation that Ambassador Thigo had yesterday morning around sovereignty and redefining what does sovereignty mean in an era where we all click accept all cookies, and it scraps all your information and puts it in a server. And as African person, this whole debate about accepting all cookies, is it going to be sitting in China or is it going to be sitting in Silicon Valley? I don't have an option, I'm just finishing that. So sovereignty in terms of our compute, where our data is going to be sitting, is the last one. And finally, use cases. We can't have use cases, and yesterday we were having this debate with somebody on our table, is we can't be having use cases around medical health, innovation with AI when we are solving for diagnosis. The use cases need to be able to speak to us as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shiko. And cookies are bad for your health. So let's just take a note of that. I think it's a good segue to Noor, I think, yeah, with Tarjama AI, where I see a lot of similarities. So we have Danilo mentioning the specific use cases around translation and working around legal AI. Shiko talking about an entire continent that has more than 2,000 languages, and basically raising some serious ethical issues around how AI is developed, but also going into this segue where you need not just inclusivity to the extent of using the technology, but inclusivity to the sense of even developing and designing the tech, so that it speaks to our local nuances and languages. And I think in the Arab world, I lived in that part of the world a bit, so I know, like Africa, the Arab world is also very oral. And I think your language basically comes from sound, right? And so I think, and Shiko, I think, raises this quite well, that translation is a deeply human craft. You can't really depend on technology to do that, yet you're scaling with AI. So how do you manage the tensions between automating for growth, but also preserving that human agency to ensure cultural accuracy?
Thank you so much. I can relate so much to what you just mentioned about the language. So for everyone, Arabic language percentage or representation on the internet is around 4% from the internet total. We're around 420 million Arabic speakers, and there's very few websites online with high quality Arabic data. And we have more than 22 dialects in Arabic. So that makes things much more complex. And to the same word, we have sometimes 20 meanings. So we struggled with the same thing, and this is why I chose to build Arabic.ai and fine-tune the LLM into Arabic. But to go to your question, like Tarjama has been around for over 16 years building in the translation space, and originally our business is very human-centric. So we deal with a very difficult, complex language and you need the human element continuously, especially when it comes to creative content or poetry, not like straightforward legal document, for example. This still needs the human element. Now, the problem that we face today is with this avalanche of technology, machine translation before even LLMs, and now LLMs have even more context and fluency. When you read the text, you have the tendency to feel that it is accurate. And then when you dig a little bit deeper, you discover that it's full of mistakes, right? So this is what we do now day and night on like fixing the grammar, structure, making AI even more perfect. Now, that leaves a big part of the human in the loop is getting, like, I would say, smaller, right? So what we've done when we launched our machine translation engine a few years back is we trained everybody on how to use machine translation post-editing. So to keep up with the work, increase volumes on the people, but at the same time, you're equipping them with technology so they don't feel left out. Now, with LLMs, you have other mandates. You need to give them other jobs, other tasks to keep them relevant. So we give courses on prompt engineering, how to fix like text post LLM, how to align. We give them more tasks to do even on content generation than just translation to keep them relevant. Now, does that mean we're saving them long term? Not sure. It's an issue. So this is a constant struggle, especially in a company that already has lots of we have thousands of freelancers depending their income on that element.
There's a question of data there because you mentioned only 4% of the internet has Arabic language. But also I think, just a follow-up question, I think even the best models, and I say best with quotes, because you said it's still early stages, still has shortcomings. I live in the Arab world and I was in trouble at some point when I said hobs instead of hop, right? So love and bread, it's very closely, right? So I wanted bread, but somebody thought I want love, right? So that was really got in trouble. And that's the reality of the Arab world. From the Maghreb right into Khaliji and as you go up, I mean, the nuances are so small that then it means the models needs to be very contextual. They have nuances and they're basically ethical issues. So I think, where do you see human judgment irrepressible, even as you build Tajma AI?
So on definitely you need human judgment when it comes to context and nuance. Like now, so for example, our model trained a lot on text data. Now when we train on voice data and we have all these dialects, you cannot rely on the same individual that's from Jordan or the Levant to fix the Gulf GCC language. So you need, and not only that, within Saudi Arabia, for example, you have maybe 60 dialects. From the north is completely different. And when they actually talk to each other, they don't understand each other. So that's even more complex. And now the demand on like call centers and all these calls that you need to receive them from a dialect, and sometimes you mix 2-3 words in English. How do you fix that? There's still a lot for the human intervention to happen here. So in our work, thank God, yeah.
Thank you so much, Halas. So I think it basically means if you don't want to be replaced by AI, please come to work for us. In Africa and the Arab world, we will still need humans in the loop. Christian, you've had all the complications from Brazil to Kenya to the Middle East. With material impact, right? So you talk about paradigm shifting examples. You back companies that redefine entire sectors, despite the complications. Which AI-driven startup, I think, in your portfolio has more surprised you with its potential for socioeconomic impact, and what makes it especially instructive for growth markets?
Yeah. Thank you, Ambassador. Instead of actually really focusing directly on a startup, I'm actually gonna like to reframe the thinking, because it's not about how large scale the problem is. It's about how well the solution addresses the pain point, right? In many of the cases that we just heard about, there is a significant pain point. And the pain point here we're trying to solve in order to make humans' life better. And this is one of the things that I always, tell entrepreneurs, don't be afraid to dream big, but it does not mean that the problem that you're addressing has to be at the global scale. And why that's so important, particularly in the growth economy, is because that is where in the developed world, in the United States, the problems that AI is being applied to just do not apply in an area where the infrastructure is different. But not only that, that actually creates opportunity because of the fact that you can build a de novo infrastructure using existing machine learning that will enhance decision-making. A couple examples in one of the areas that I'm particularly passionate about these days about agriculture. And in agriculture, some of the startups that I'm very excited for are the ones who solve one of the biggest problem for anybody in the ag tech space, or I should say the ag space, which is access to labor. And access to labor who has the expertise. And this is where, if you can generate the data that is accurate, to your point about hallucination earlier, that is accurate, you can then use that as a way to inform what the human will end up doing. Because I don't think it's about removing the human from the equation, ever. It's about helping the human work better.
Thank you so much. And that brings me to Osama, to the extent that everybody has been talking about basically the big ethical issues here. I think Christian has also brought in this whole element of governance a bit. So to what point, and I know you really work very much around with your platform around, your platform is built for complex enterprises, basically. And so in what ways have you seen it directly strengthen governance? Chico has raised a lot of ethical issues, same as in Brazil. To what extent has your platform strengthened governance or transparency, but also accountability in growth markets? And what are what concrete benefits have you observed?
So thanks a lot for the question, and thanks for having me. We still, by the way, have a lot of challenge around data. So many people building all around AI, around models, training the models to understand languages, but the problem is still, how can we even get the data together to be able to benefit from all of that? The data infrastructure is one of the foundation that people always don't think about it upfront. They think about building data centers, they think about building GPUs, they think about how to access all of these machines, and then at the end of the day, they have billions of investment and not utilized. And the reason, the data is not there. So the challenge about the data, even if the data in English, like we're dealing with so many companies, large companies been spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and they still cannot get their data together. And the proof is, go to any company and ask them, what are you using every day? They are using Excel files. They are spreading Excel files everywhere. So there is no centralization of data. So how can you get even to AI and benefit from all of that while still everyone using Excel? Because it's very challenging. And that's what we have been trying to do. How can we help companies accelerate or simplify the data integration and make the data available for a lot of AI models and building on top of that? And we have seen many, many utilization of that. One of the examples I can tell you, in my own country, in Egypt, we work very closely with the authorization because there are about 300,000 deaths of car accidents every year. So how can we notify drivers, for example, when they do overspeed? People, when they cross the speed limit, they used to get a notification in a month later on. Now, and I'm sure a lot of Egyptians here, when people exceed the speed limit, they get a notification within a few minutes. And the fee for the notification is also there's an AI, how much you have to pay. Is it 200 pounds? Is it 400, 600? Depending a lot on your behavior. That actually helped a lot on people immediately. They stop exceeding the speed limit, they behave much better, and that enhances a lot saving lives. But we were only able to do that by aggregating so much data and make the data in real-time access and getting the data to the ML models that can actually identify how much that driver should pay and send that notification to that driver immediately. That resulted in an immediate, the government is making so much money, that's one thing, but also we are saving a lot of lives. And we're very, very proud of that. So this is still the challenge around infrastructure is data before anything else. And that's what I really wanted to highlight here.
Thank you so much. And I'll come back to Christian, I think, because he mentioned a lot of Excel files. To what point, and because you work in these developed markets, and we are looking at how do you get into growth markets, to what extent do you, for example, see how to adapt and expand from, and you're right? So copy-paste model doesn't work. You kind of have to be very contextual, to Shiko's point. You have to be very nuanced around how you scale. I see scale in terms of coming into growth markets. What commercial, regulatory, ethical hurdles do you see that we need to leap when you come to these markets?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, well, and this is where some of the panelists mentioned earlier, there has to be a certain element of bottom-up aspect, and the bottom-up means that there has to be roots, basically, wherever you're going, that will actually accept it, right? That's actually a very, very important element, because before you embark on, bring a solution to a new market, it's not only about making sure that you have customers there, because I fully agree with the comment there that, customers is very important, but you also have to understand who will do just the engineering around it, who will do the support. How are you going, again, bring the human touch basically to the experience. One of the areas that I, and yes, I'm a hardware person more than a software person, which effectively means that one of the questions I always ask, the individuals who really want to bring, AI tool, machine learning tools is, okay, but what is the UX, the user experience going to be like? Because the user experience, how is the tool going to be used is what will determine, honestly, the success of it. And back to the point about the languages, right? If you basically keep getting mistakes after mistake, why would you keep using it, right? This is part of the problem that you really need to understand how the deployment is going to go in order to take root and in order to have impact. And at the end of the day, I hope that's what everybody here would like to do, is to have some level of impact.
Got it. And thank you so much. And Danilo, I think I'm going to come back to you because questions have been raised around data. How many Egyptians are there in the room? That question was asked. I didn't see hands. How many Egyptians? Okay. 10? You are not sure, Rania? You see? Just checking. You're not sure you're Egyptian, so you kind of have to prove whether he's telling the truth or not. Anyway, but I think, Danilo, to the point around data and data availability, and the legal profession is a little bit tricky. Of course, it's very old, but to the extent, and maybe, Shiko, you'll challenge this a bit in terms of how criminal justice system works, availability of data, depending on where you are. In Africa, we don't have case law when it comes to alternative justice systems, so there's another discussion we can have there. But I think to your point is how dependable are the models, especially based on data availability. And I take the Excel sheet point very clearly, that we assume that a lot of this data is digitized from the 4% Arabic language to, I'm sure, Portuguese, maybe, I don't know the percentage, but I'm sure it's not a lot. So to what point do you strike a balance based on availability of data and success or efficiency of your model?
That's an excellent. Hello. That's an excellent question, Mr. Ambassador. So when you're thinking about data, especially on the legal sector, but also as we saw here on administration in general, we have to talk about the government as well, which sometimes we leave out of the equation. But in our sector specifically, Brazil has a main advantage, which is public data is very readily available and dependable. As surprising as some people may think, in Brazil it's much easier to get government data on elections, on court ruling, and so on and so forth, than in the US. So courts are constitutionally obliged to release their data on a daily basis on their website. So that makes it very dependable. All that we have to do is to build these web scraping robots that will collect the data and put that on our database. On the one hand, that makes it very dependable, but on the other hand, then it's harder to build a moat around our data set, right? So we have this, make this decision. How we have the data, it's dependable, but how do you build on it? How do you make like a proprietary data that is not easily replicable so that you have a moat around your business? So in terms of dependability, I guess that in Brazil specifically, we are safe, but I'm not sure to what extent this conclusion travels to other settings as well. And then in this case, we have to bring the government into the equation to talk about data availability, dependability, but also sovereignty about the data.
And thank you so much. So Chico, I'm going to come to you very quickly. In terms of, so we had in Brazil, the government already provides data in an open format, open standard. So if you had any recommendation for emerging markets, and because I'm sure our open data portal was 10 years, 15 years ago, and it died a natural death. So if you have any advice to a policymaker in a growth market, what single policy or regulation would you champion to drive AI adoption? And maybe I'm going to also just come very quickly after Chico to Noor, right? Because also part of artificial intelligence is to be very conscious around our environmental footprint. We've had some ultimate saying that it's enough. Please stop telling ChatGPT thank you. Because then you're costing the world a lot of billions of dollars around our environmental footprint. And I'm going to tie those 2 points. So I think, Chico, what would be the single policy sort of recommendation you want somebody from a growth market, maybe one of them? And Noor, this whole question of the environment and how we are using technology in a more efficient way. I mean, I've had discussions with Cohere, Lam, and a lot of those folks who are building these models, to the extent that there's a big debate that right now you stop using Google Maps to go to ChatGPT to ask for directions. It's more expensive in terms of environmental footprint to ask GPT for directions to go to a Starbucks than just to go to the Google map and find directions. So again, that human element of how do we ensure that we are efficient and that technology does not increase harm to the planet. So Chico, you go first on the policy recommendation. I'll go to Noor on the environmental question. So Chico, please go.
So I was laughing with him when he was saying that most of the people who are talking about data is in Excel sheet. I mean, that's like 2 steps ahead of people where when you ask for data sets, especially from African governments, they give you a pile of paper. And so I wish it was PDF, then I'll be able to scrap it. But the PDF they give you is like pictures, not PDF. It's actual scans. And you're told, okay, there's your data. And this has happened to us in Kenya. And you're thinking, what am I supposed to do? So you have to get like interns to type it out, to digitize it. So if I was to have one policy recommendation, I'll build up on what you have, is for many of the emerging markets, and I know I need to come to Brazil because I don't know a lot about Brazil, but I know very well about Asia, India, and Africa. We are struggling with the same exact thing, is that data representation in our context and in our culture and in our language, is invest in infrastructure, both soft and hard infrastructure, to have that representation. Because in the next, I mean, they're saying AGI is coming to life in 2025. In 2 years, our culture and our context will be erased completely if AGI comes to life, because everybody will default to that. As I mentioned, as my child said, his name is not miracle. Why? Because the bot has told him so. How many other things are happening in that same way? So policy recommendation, investing that soft and hard infrastructure to make sure that our data is it's collected and labeled and represented in this quote-unquote race to AGI.
Noor, please, on the environmental question.
So on the ChatGPT, thank you, and ChatGPT saying welcome, the amount of money. So as everybody knows, when you train models, you spend millions of dollars. That's if the model is small, hundreds of millions, billions, depending on the size of these models. So what we opted to do is we were extremely cost efficient in the way we fine-tune the model because, one, we're a startup. We don't have infinite access to cash of government. So we need to be very careful about how do we fine-tune a model. So we chose an SLM, a 14 billion parameter model, that outperforms in Arabic ChatGPT 4.5, Cohere, DeepSeek. And if that says anything, it says it's all about the quality of the data and the way you fine-tune the model to get the best results. So it's not just about size. Size is important when you're building like all these large models, but it's not efficient. You cannot rely on any government entity or any private sector today cannot have any of these GPUs. First, we don't have access to GPUs. You need to wait a year and a half to receive one if you're lucky. Some countries do not have access to even receive these GPUs. So there's restrictions. Second, the cost is astronomical just to be able to run them. And then you have the data sovereignty, which is that if you're a bank, you want that on your infrastructure. So if I'm going to host the model in my bank, what kind of infrastructure I need to be able to host a 70 billion parameter model and run it on a daily basis, just for someone from the marketing to say, I want to draft an email, and another person to say, please write me a message on WhatsApp. And that's actually how it's being used today, right? In like day-to-day life. So what we've done is we made sure that it's run on one GPU, if it's on-prem, which is extremely efficient. You can run it for $4,000 a month, despite the size of your organization. And it outperforms the rest. It does not cover every single task that ChatGPT or others can do, but it's irrelevant. You don't want the model to do everything because you're using it for a specific task. So the most important thing that needs to happen now is you need custom models that are small, lean, and they solve specific tasks. Because when I solve a translation task, I'm going very deep in one language, one task, small model that outperforms the big one. So why do I need a 70 billion parameter just for that specific task? So I think this is the thinking, and this is where the world should be heading. And again, as you just mentioned, you spend billions and hundreds of billions on these infrastructures. Who's going to use it? Who has the budgets, by the way, to spend all this money on just compute? Even governments can't.
No, that for sure. We can't afford it. I'm one of those countries pushing for something else. I'm going to open up for questions, comments. One from Egypt, for sure. Well, I was watching the hands coming up. So any other one? So we have a second one. Can we have a third one? Third one. Okay.
Thank you to this amazing panel. This was a really engaging discussion. And my question is, you've talked a lot about, for example, Noor, the lack of language, Noor and Dr. Shiko, language access and barriers. And it spurred a thought in my head. It's what is the role of the open source ecosystem? And you talked about leapfrogging as well. What is the role of open source ecosystems in helping the region not face these problems? For context, I used to work at Meta. And one of the first projects I worked on launching when I was working in AI at Meta was a project called No Language Left Behind, which actually deals specifically with this problem for under-resourced languages. And so I'm just wondering, how does the region utilize that? What are your recommendations for how to leapfrog the technology?
Excellent. Excellent. So question, and I think it can go to Shiko, but anybody else, because I'm sure you're also building on open source. Otherwise, it wouldn't be cheap to build it. So a question on open source, but also I like to throw the open source question around bias, around quality, around security. So there's open source is always loaded. So good if the panel also clarifies what open source means in the age of AI. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm from Central Eastern Europe, and my question to Mr. Assad El-Kari about the data. So that's actually because we do a lot of digital transformation, and now we try to do AI transformation, and that's a challenge for majority of corporates as well as government. A data issue. And everybody said, okay, the first step, so we have a lot of systems, of course, we have a lot of data, and the first step is to do the lake. So the question to you probably, if this is really lake or something else, so what we can do. And the question to others, because we also work with boards, and all supervisory boards as on the top of the management, so they ask where we have to start to transform our businesses, and especially what is the role of supervisory boards in case of implementation of AI. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, question. Thanks, thanks, Donovan. I see you. So, I think the question of course, interoperability and digital transformation in the era of AI. I think anybody can take that in your closing remarks. Last question was somewhere here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks to the panel. Just feel myself getting smarter just listening to you all. My question, very quick. Every time we talk about compute, most times we're talking about data centers and so on. I'm wondering what your view on like edge computing and smaller devices is. Like, what's the role of that? How do you see that in growth markets? I don't want to lead the question, but I just want to know what you think.
Thank you so much. And maybe as you take the questions, you can make your closing remarks. And because I think the conversation has been very rich around languages, inclusivity has been very rich around examples that AI is transforming existing challenges, whether it's linguistic diversity, but also the need to use very contextually specific nuanced models that actually address challenges rather than boiling the ocean, as I call it, around ChatGPT, but also to the extent of governance and how we govern data and how we need to figure out how we transition or transform communities from Excel sheets or papers or files, I've seen them, into digital formats that they can be leveraged to sort of address challenges. But I think also to the extent of how we need to be very mindful of not necessarily copying, pasting examples or experiences, but also being very locally relevant, locally nuanced, but also to the extent that even when we do that, we recognize a place of sovereignty. And protecting indigenous knowledge or data in an age of interdependence. So that's, I think, the bigger question you need to ask. So for me, let me start with Christian as we go to end with Noor.
Thank you. I think I'm actually going to pick up right where you ended just now, Ambassador, which is, again, it would make no sense to do copy and paste. And here's a very good, this is concrete example. In 2010, Kenya and Nigeria had more banking transaction via cell phones than the entire developed world combined. Why? Because the developed world, they had, and we have still, a system, an infrastructure that basically is, I will use the word, archaic. And this is the idea where, again, right, this idea of edge computing, this idea of on-prem is you should not limit yourself just because it works in a geography. It does not mean that that's the best way of doing it. And I think that's the beauty of growth economy, is that you can actually start from scratch and learn from best in the art, which is not necessarily how things are done.
Thank you so much. But there's a place for collaboration. Thank you. Danilo?
So for my final remarks, I actually want to end with a reflection and a question for which I don't have a clear answer for, which is the AI game a winner-take-all kind of game? and all these opportunities that we have right now, they're going to survive for a few years only because it's a game for hyperscalers, and that's what we have been seeing. For example, some 3 to 4 years ago, we were capable of doing our own models to predict the outcome of court ruling. After large language models, we could reduce the time of doing that from 6 weeks to a few days, but then everybody else was able to do so. And as these companies get bigger and accumulate more scale and the models become more powerful and ingest more data, what is going to be left for builders in growth markets? What is the space that we should be looking at? And how do we still leverage opportunities in this game that is very based on scale? So how can we do things that doesn't make the game become a winner-take-all kind of game?
Working? So I'll pick from where you are. I'll start with my closing remark and then answer the 2 questions. Is every time I hear the AI race in America versus China, and now I hear India has joined the race, ask to what end? Where are we running to? And when you ask the hyperscalers, they're running to have the fastest model, they're running towards getting to AGI, they're running towards all these things. To what end is the question? Because for Africa, when you think about AI, I am very bullish. So this is where, like, my friend Joy here and others will throw me out of the door, because I'm very bullish about the role of AI in closing that development and economic development gap in Africa. And I give this example, is in Africa right now is 1 doctor to 10,000 patients. What that can do is every community health worker can be empowered to be able to provide high-level healthcare using edge computing, running small models on a phone to be able to provide high-level healthcare to patients across the continent. That's where I am bullish at. So we have to redefine what this race is about and to what end we are running to, and then quit the race as Africa to go towards something that is more meaningful and more impactful. That's in as far as my closing remarks. To answer your questions, I love that question because in 2024, I'll have a very, very different answer. I was actually part of the team that was doing No Language Left Behind, and we had like a fight with Jan about what does that actually mean. But what 2025 did for us, 15th of January to be more specific, is that DeepSeek was launched. And now we had options. We had Llama and DeepSeek. Then 2 weeks later, Qwen was launched. We had DeepSeek, Qwen, and Llama, and now there is a third one. And just 2 weeks ago, India launched their own, which means that we have options towards the openness of AI models, that we're not closed into an environment that we have to keep buying tokens to be able to train models with our own data. Does it make sense for you to give data and then buy the tokens to train the data, and then you lose both the data and the tokens at some point? So for me, open source models are the way to go. And this whole conversation around should each region have its own foundational model? Absolutely. Why? Because we all run the risk of somebody saying this model is going to be productized and commercialized. What happens to those regions where they're relying on somebody's foundational model? So yes, open source all the way to go. We learn. I love what DeepSeek did. It fully documented their process so that everybody in the world, if you have the resources, you can go and replicate and try and build it. And that's, I think, what India did. And I know a few people in Africa who are doing the same. And then open source everybody so that everybody can do it. So open source all the way. Number 2, going back to Emeka's thing, edge is where we are going. So I know Emeka knows about a project we are doing. It's called resource-constrained AI. And it's how do we optimize AI for the African continent, given what we have, and given all the tariffs and blockers that have been put around access to compute, access to models, access to talent. How do we optimize AI for the African continent? And edge is actually the way to go, because edge allows us to do things, to be able to build models that are relevant for us. So you're not being flashy and you don't have too much, fanciness around what you're building. You're building what is relevant, solving a very specific need with the compute that you have. And that is the way to go as the African continent.
Omar.
I just want to say that the direction of utilizing open source and the direction of utilizing models, smaller models to do specific things, this is not just for growing companies, for growing countries. Actually, the largest enterprise now are doing exactly that. Largest enterprises are not actually moving to utilize OpenAI or utilize Gemini or anything like that. These will be more for the public. But for any enterprise, they all care about security. They all care about building models on top of Llama or on top of other open source. So I know that Noha did a great job convincing Mark to invest in Llama, so thank you. But that actually opened huge opportunity. I think without open source, no enterprise in the world would ever be able to use GenAI. Only open source allowed big enterprise to start thinking about this. Now, here's the thing. All these open source models and all this training now available for growing countries or growing economy. There are so many young generation who are hungry to do so much stuff about that. So that can accelerate. I call AI artificial intelligence or acceleration for innovation. This is actually, if you see how many companies, startups now will start in many countries that nobody even hear about them. And they can start competing with the largest companies in the world and take market share. That's because of AI. That's because of all the GenAI capabilities now available to them. What countries should actually help all those people, again, how to access information, how to take all of these documents and be able to process that, because without data, none of those people will be able to do. So helping a lot, big organization, government, to stop frauds and things like that, that can only be with open source. And bringing that to the country and bring that to a much smaller infrastructure that is needed to be able to build that. So I think the world ahead of us is very promising. And we should be very, very optimistic about what AI can do. It's not about taking jobs away. It's actually about creating a lot more jobs than ever before, especially with growing economies.
Thank you so much. Noor, last but not least.
Thank you so much. I think like the panelists covered almost everything. So I'm just gonna say something very similar, but this is what I think DeepSeek probably taught all of us is there's no winner takes it all. So this is definitely the way forward. We're going to see multiple models with much cheaper approach. And every other day there's a new model that's coming out. There are like 3-4 companies that came out of China post DeepSeek, competing with DeepSeek with amazing technology and even like cheaper approach to the compute. And definitely the way forward is open source. There's no way for any of us to be able to innovate the way we're innovating today unless there's open source that's already laying the ground for us to be able to build on top of it. And then on the compute side of things, I do believe that compute is going to become like the cloud infrastructure, like how it used to be super expensive. Now look where it is today. It's just going to be better. When we don't know, it's still up in the air. Like NVIDIA said that they're going to launch this $1,500 super small computer. Yeah, maybe this is like far-fetched, but again, I think this is the way forward. We have to believe in this, because for this technology and for the evolution of AI, the compute cost has to significantly go down for all of us to benefit from the technology. And again, data sovereignty and being private about your data we're going to see much more of that. It's not only just data security. It's again like soft power. You own your data. You control the fate of your nation as well. So you cannot depend on a full model that's built by someone else, and then tomorrow they tell you, we don't like you, you can't have access to this technology, you go back to
zero. Thank you so much. And thank you so much. So I think I'm going to close the panel, and I know Donovan was staring at me because of time. So I think 4 key points. One, compute. We've had that in terms of the infrastructure, and to the question around on digital transformation and AI transformation, I think I would really suggest to the team here that we need a different conversation around leadership or technology leadership, so that I'm sure the market is taking care of the engineers, the data scientists, the machine learning stuff, but we need a different sort of thinking around technology leadership so that the leaders understand how to resource digital transformation in the age of AI. And also to make these decisions around whether you need to use compute to buy it and it does nothing, or whether it makes sense. I think the second part for me is very much around data, and that's really been the question here. How do you ensure that data is available in growth markets in a way that can be harnessed to be leveraged to solve the problems that we have? And we've had Brazil, we've had Kenya, we've had, I'm sure in the Middle East, you're not just doing translation. It's about ensuring that local language representation is available to solve those very nuanced problems that are very cultural specific. And also, to the extent of how do you leverage collaboration or markets that have already dealt with these problems based on principle and not necessarily copying, pasting the kind of solutions. The third part, of course, is the talent piece, and that is, Shiko, you said it very well. There's no for us without us. Like, you can't build models and assume you're solving problems with the growth markets. You have to build those solutions in collaboration with folks in the global in the growth markets. And you've talked about the dialects in Egypt, in sort of in the Middle East. The last part, I think, for me, is why I talk about the use cases. And we need to do more of that, especially in the growth markets, for us to understand these nuances. But also, if you have to solve problems, they have to be use case driven, right? Whether it's ag, as you mentioned, health, learning outcomes, governance, and all that. So I think, for me, the panel has, I think, helped us answer the question whether you can harness AI for achieving prosperity in global growth markets. And with that, please thank Shiko, Danilo, Osama, Noor, and Christian for their interventions.
Thank you.